just give you a minute to settle. I think we've had enough words, actually, so sermon's going to be good next year. I'll just come back and do it then.
All right.
I think 2 or 3 board members just fainted. So. Shmuel noticed his friend Avram underneath a streetlight searching for something on the ground. "What are you doing, Avram?" he asked. "I've lost my keys. Please help me look for them." A while passed with no success. "Avram, where exactly did you lose those keys?" "I lost them in that alley over there." Shmuel was dumbfounded. So why are we looking here?" Avram looked at his friend and said, "Because the light is better here." "Teach us to count our days," says Psalm 90, "that we may attain wisdom." Now, we've looked at that psalm in different ways over the last 10 days, and now for my final High Holiday sermon as your senior rabbi, let's look at that amazing verse in the context of the rest of the psalm. Maybe discover some secrets to a more meaningful life. There's so much there. Take verse 14, for instance. "Satisfy us at daybreak with your steadfast love, that we may sing for joy all our days." At daybreak. Just give us a glimpse. Give us a taste, a sunrise. That's all I need. Just a moment at daybreak. A hot cup of coffee, and a fresh, crusty roll. That's all I need, and I'm good to go. Even if I don't find my keys, I'll be happy because I poured myself into the task of looking all the while, knowing that in the end, the keys will probably remain unfound, leaving it to the next generation to try. But despite the seemingly tragic nature of all of life and this effort, the psalm expresses hope in its final verse, verse 17. It says, "May God's pleasantness be upon us. Let the work of our hands be established for us. The work of our hands, let it be established." We may not find the keys. We probably won't find the keys given where we're looking, but please God, let our search be meaningful. If we don't find the keys, let's discover something that we had no idea we were looking for. I love this psalm. Rav Kook, the first chief rabbi of Israel, asked, "Why is the phrase, 'the work of our hands,' repeated?" His reply, "It's not enough that our actions advance positive and significant goals. Sweetness, too. Through our work, we should become keenly aware of Noam Adonai, as the psalm says, God's pleasantness upon us. So in the end, if we don't complete the task, but the work is meaningful and productive, through it, we will feel blessed." We should all aim to feel that way at the end of the day, and we should all feel that way today. For here is the secret of that psalm. Teach us to count our days means not only that everything we do should be infused with meaning, but that we should also pour all of ourselves, every ounce of our soul, into everything we do. Every sandcastle we build, every dream we dream, from the smallest to the greatest gesture. And that is my final High Holidays message. Our life is our work. But doesn't this fly in the face of the cherished 21st century ideal of work-life balance? which has become almost an 11th commandment in our society. Well, it's true that we need to have priorities: family, health, parents, partner, children, all priorities. But the separation of work from the rest of life is an illusion. Ultimately, it's all one. We need to be all in for all of it. Not just 9 to 5, but 5 to 9. Not just until 65 or age 70 or 62 if you live in France. But all of it, from the first breath to the last. Admittedly, my profession is an extreme example, but shouldn't the seamless integration of work and life be what we all strive to achieve? Isn't that what brings happiness, meaning, and fulfillment? I happen to be a rabbi, but you'll never guess what my pleasure reading is on vacation, when I'm supposedly off the clock. Jewish history. My favorite TV series this year, watched when I supposedly wasn't working: Mrs. Maisel and Fauda. My favorite films were Golda and Oppenheimer. Sue me. I didn't ask for overtime pay. But for me, there is no separation between work and life. And that's why it's a good thing that I love my work. Here's something interesting, and I've said this many times. The Hebrew word for work is avodah. And the same word, avodah, is used for worship. The avodah service, the worship later on in our Musaf service with the high priest. It's the prime example of worship and work. Our work, our life, our prayers, they're all one, all part of an integrated, organic whole. Hey, I don't even take Shabbat off. God took Shabbat off. I don't get Shabbat off. God doesn't have to do 2 bar mitzvahs, a naming and an ufruf. And I've been all in for all those all the time, and yet, as with God, Shabbat still replenishes the soul. I'd like to add another wrinkle to Rav Kook's commentary. What does the psalm mean when it speaks of Maaseh Yadeinu, the work of our hands, twice? It means that the work of my hands is incomplete without the work of your hands. Our work has been woven together in a single tapestry, magnificent tapestry. There's no single point where my work ends and yours begins, where my story ends and yours begins. Your story is part of my story, and vice versa. And I see that much more clearly as I look back over the lives here that have touched mine these past 37 years. I'm standing up here on a shore, and I look out and see the waves of people coming in and going out like time-lapse photography. And those people who sat in the seats where you're sitting when they were here years and years ago, I see them before me right now. Their presence is eternal. Their legacies never disappear. You know, I keep all the eulogies. I keep the bar mitzvah speeches too, to balance it off. But I was flipping through the eulogies, and I've saved them all. And people like Arthur White, who sat right there, his indefatigable optimism moved mountains. Merle Aronin, whose clear shofar call reverberates still in this sanctuary. Ed Golov, who lay dying down the hall in the hospital from where his great-grandchild was being born, and has been their guardian angel ever since. Sam Kravitz, literally the nicest guy ever. Mina Schwartz, unthinkable, heroic. Karen Johnson, who, when she was told she might have 1 year to live, she refused to travel or otherwise address the bucket list. She told, sorry. Anyone else need him? Yeah, got him. I have more. She told her son, Doug, "Why would I want to go anywhere else when I could spend the time right here with you. And she still has not moved. That's why I bring her up. That tree was planted in her memory by her friends right out there. How many people in this community remain who know that that tree must never come down? Bruce Feinberg, his family is here. He willed his body up to this pulpit for one final aliyah. Lori Frank, who wouldn't have family here now, she belonged to an Orthodox chavurah. Coming here, she was asked how she could reconcile, I got a lot, Orthodox Judaism with her feminism, and she said, ask God, she'll understand. Ben Evans, who witnessed Kristallnacht as a child, chose this room to tell his grandchildren about it for the first time in detail, not long after he died. And there's Adam Weissman, wheelchair-bound, who taught us the sky's the limit. That's on his stone at the cemetery. It's a challenge we also learned from others who faced physical challenges, like David Jaffe, Pamela Weiss. Then there was Bruce Martin, who might have thought he was the real Mayor Martin in this town, because the way he walked the streets, everyone knew him. So many heroes who refused to be defined by disability or to be weighed down by mortality itself, like Dana Kraus. We sang from Wicked. She defied gravity with her beautiful dancing. And Penny Horowitz, who welcomed guests so often to her home and our gift shop, and now welcomes us next door at the cemetery. Bobby Silberman, who gave cancer the fight of his life and inspired us all. And his parents said Kaddish for him on the same day of every month from his yahrzeit, said the Kaddish every day until COVID took that away from us. We had no longer an in-person minyan for them to attend. But now, tomorrow, at exactly this time, on Bobby's yahrzeit, Bobby will welcome his father, Alan, who passed away a couple of days ago, in the cemetery. All of these people, Frank Rosner, of course, Dave Gruber, Ed Kaplan, Saul Siskin, Bernie Lemoyne, Josh Lang, I can see them chomping down bagels in there every Sunday morning. Ed would bring the bagels. Phyllis Lapin, whose creativity sparked my own. Edith Sherman, who built a city. Mel Allen, who defined a dynasty. Jack Mallon, whose deep love for tradition is reflected in all of the restored Torahs in our Ark. Fred Wiseman, who is a Tikkun Olam machine. Alan Coulter, whose deep soul and even deeper love for Judaism belied his funny man image. Don Edelman, an extraordinary Jewish educator, congregant, advisor, and friend. There are so many more, I know, and I will include more in my sermon notes. And I apologize to the hundreds and hundreds of people whose names I couldn't mention now, but these are our Torahs. Many of you won't recognize most of these names. Maybe some won't recognize any. But they are our living scrolls. Their stories are our stories. Each of their lives lent a sense of exaltation to the human condition and the Jewish narrative. And each of their stories has merged with the life of this community, and each of their stories has merged with mine. And each soul is like a wave. It's receded from the shore into the oneness of the universe, and they all sat here. I don't know about corporations, medical practices, law firms, universities, but I do know that a house of worship embodies institutional memory. That memory is precious. It is priceless. And when it came time to say goodbye to these precious souls, most of whom were sent off from this sanctuary. Paying tribute to them was my work. The dirt under my fingernails was my work, but it was also my worship and my life. They were all friends. All meant so much to me. I walk next door at the cemetery and realize I've buried half of them. It feels like that. I found myself compelled to ask forgiveness of many of them on their deathbeds. And they were probably thinking, now he does this? Each one of them contributed one brick to a foundation that is so strong and vibrant and changing. They may be dead, but they are proof that American Jewry is alive and well. None of them found the keys that Shmuel and Avram were rummaging for in the darkness, but all of these lives were bathed in divine light. We are the sum of our stories. And each of our stories is like an interactive novel, spinning off numerous sequels. And each of us touches the lives of others in ways we can barely imagine and often never know. And each story becomes timeless, transcendent. And now I turn to the living. All of you have been an integral part of my life. Not mere congregants, not clients, certainly not customers. God forbid. And I believe in customer service. But that's not it. There's something about the relationship between clergy and congregation that cannot be compared to any other personal or professional relationship, especially when that relationship is multi-generational. Rabbi Albert Lewis delivered his final sermon posthumously by way of a letter read to his congregation on the Yom Kippur following his passing. It's described in a book by Mitch Albom. He started the letter by explaining that for all his years, people have been asking him whether there is an afterlife, and he wrote, "Now that I know, I can't tell you." He did not offer a list of his accomplishments. Rather, he asked for forgiveness for not saving more marriages, not visiting more homebound, not easing the pain of parents who had just lost a child, for not having done more with every breathing minute allotted to him. I echo those sentiments today. I know I could have done better. Lewis also told one of my all-time favorite Yom Kippur jokes. He gave a sermon where the subject was death and informed the congregation that everyone was going to die. After the service, a man comes up to him all excited. The rabbi asks, "Why are you so excited?" "I just told the entire congregation they're going to die." "Yes," said the man, "and that's why I'm so excited. I belong to another congregation." I've discovered that life can be a thrilling ride if we greet each day with fresh eyes. In Deuteronomy, it says, "The Lord your God commands you this day to observe these laws and rules, to observe them faithfully." And Rashi then asks why it says this day, why not every day? And the commentator's response, every day, every time one fulfills a mitzvah, it should feel as if it is the first. That's how I've counted my days. Every day, like the first. That's how I've appreciated my work life. There have been well over 1,000 bar and bat mitzvahs during my time here. And I've wanted each one to feel like the first. I missed only one. And even that one has an asterisk. It was for the March of the Living. 2 weeks that I spent escorting dozens of other teens, of other youth, many Bethel youth, to Poland and Israel. Missed only one. Now, I will say she had many months' notice, and the bat mitzvah decided to keep the date because it was tied to a promised trip to Disney World the following week. And I would have done the same. I missed oodles of my family's own simchas. I missed my own kids' school plays and choral performances. I would not miss a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah. How could I? It's the only one for that child. It should feel like the only one for me. Every funeral is the only one for that person. It should feel like the only one for me. Every naming is the only time that baby will be named, and it should feel like the only one for me. And every wedding, well, it's not always the only one. By the way, I love to do weddings. So I brought my card. And he hands, anyway, just so you know, I have some endorsements in this room, in fact. Should feel, whatever. Anyone needs them? I'll hand them out more later on. I don't have an earth ball to throw around the room, so I'm throwing in my card instead. You never know. But the point is that every day should go into work as if it is the first day. That's always been my approach. I would not miss a bar or bat mitzvah. So I'm going to share 3 stories. There are thousands I could tell, maybe will someday in other forms, but 3 that I want to tell you about right now. Over the years, there have been inflection points where I've been given opportunities to take on new opportunities. There were very few times, 37 years, very few times when I really came close to leaving. One occurred about 20 years ago when I interviewed at a prestigious congregation and was asked back for Shabbat, but we couldn't find a date because I had all these bar mitzvahs. That congregation in Atlanta, the largest conservative shul in the South, not that size is important, got around the problem by deciding to turn Shabbat into Tuesday. So I flew down, they filled the place, I gave a Shabbat sermon on a Tuesday, and it went very well. So then, you might be asking why I'm here. Well, there was one more step that we needed to take. I needed the stamp of approval from the boss. No, not God, Mara. Mara's opinion always mattered to me more than my own. She's never steered me wrong. She's never steered you wrong either, or your kids. As most of you know, and it's been said for the past 37 years, she has been the heartbeat of this congregation. God willing, you will find a great rabbi. You will never find another Mara. So we bought the plane tickets. We're ready to go. Everything was all set. But as they say, man plans and God laughs. Or in this case, cries. The night before our scheduled departure, our dear friend and congregant, Pamela Cohn-Allen, succumbed to her long, heroic battle with ovarian cancer. Pamela's impact on our Bethel story goes way beyond what any of us can measure. Certainly the trips to Israel, but so many other things. An irony of ironies, Scott, her husband, who's given me the permission to share this, he grew up in the same Atlanta shul, and he and Pam were advising me through this process. As I sat at her bedside, in between the prayers and lots of silence in her final weeks, she asked only one thing of me, that I join Scott on the plane that would take her home to Jerusalem. Now, I'm very careful in making promises in my work. You never know what the next day will bring. It's a common Jewish expression you hear in Israel all the time. Bli neder, kol nidre, the word nidre, vow, without a vow. We don't like to take vows. I can't promise, but in this case, I knew what it would mean to her. and I promised her that when her time came, I would be on that plane. I would not leave her side. And she smiled, and that comforted her. And so when the day arrived, my Delta flight to Atlanta was missing 2 Hammermans, and I was with Scott on El Al, escorting Pamela's body to her final resting place in Jerusalem. I stayed in Israel for just a few hours. I had to get back here for a bar mitzvah. The people in Atlanta couldn't believe what I did. I don't know if they thought I was crazy or snubbing them. We had trouble finding a date to reschedule, and the process sort of lost momentum. But I definitely thought Pamela or someone was trying to tell me something, that my work here was not yet finished. I made a promise, and that promise was Ma'aseh Yadenu, the work of our hands. When I flew with Pamela's body, that was the work of God's hands. I did not fly there because it's my job. I flew with Pamela because it was my avodah. And that decision became our collective destiny. Second story. Fast forward to October 25th, 2018. Call came in from the Jewish home, and I received the devastating news of my mother's passing. She hadn't been well. She was 95, stricken with Parkinson's. And still, it came as an incredible shock when I got that call. She died on a Thursday, and the funeral was to be on Sunday in Boston. That Shabbat, we had a bar mitzvah scheduled here. Couldn't miss it. You notice a theme? I wasn't officially in mourning yet. I couldn't let that family and that student down on the biggest day of his life. So with a heavy heart, but hiding the pain as best I could, I led that service. My heart got much heavier when I learned that while we had been praying, the worst anti-Semitic attack in American Jewish history took place in Pittsburgh. Many of you know that feeling when a parent dies. You're adrift, aimless, not knowing what to do, waiting for the rabbi to lead you, to stand you up, to help you shovel the dirt. It had been 40 years since I lost my father, so I was quite adrift. I was an orphan. But I had a rabbi, a good one. My rabbi was me. So with the help of an old friend, a funeral director in Boston, and down here from Melissa Fahey of Gallagher's, an angel from heaven, who wouldn't even let me pay the tolls, my mom was brought home to Brookline. And then I came back here for the Shiva. You know, I could have picked another story. I was going to plow through. Shiva can be incredibly life-affirming, and I experienced that. I sat publicly in this building for 10 hours each day because I believe in the importance of that ritual and in its healing power. Stretching 40 hours over 4 weekdays that were not work days enabled me to have real one-on-one conversations with about 400 people. As much as this was my personal loss, we were all feeling adrift that week. American Jews were angry and terrified. A synagogue, our Jewish safe space, had been violated. Defiantly, hundreds of you came here that Friday night. And we had some non-Jewish neighbors here too. Some of my clergy friends, they were angels too. And I walked in after Lachadodi, which is the tradition for mourners, and I led the rest of the service from that point on. Our collective Jewish my personal Shiva and the Jewish people's Shiva fused together as one. As much as people came to comfort me, they also looked to me for comfort. As much as they helped to restore the natural order of things for me, we all sat together, low to the ground, mourned the untimely loss of good, innocent people, vulnerable people, people at prayer, people who had only love in their hearts, and we mourned for their innocence and the loss of ours. One on one, on one, on one, on one, the healing took place down in the trenches of the mourning bench. And on Thursday, our Hebrew school students came to me, and I've never been so proud of them. They did, and I taught it. We did a real-time lesson on how to comfort a mourner that happened to be a real mourner. And they each came up to me individually, one at a time, and hugged me or held my hand and said, "I'm sorry for your loss." In any normal job, the boss would have said, "Go home. Leave everything on your desk. Take as long as you need and come back when you are ready." Do you understand how I couldn't do that? How I never would have been able to live with myself had I retreated to my own private mourner's bench that week of all weeks. Worst anti-Semitic episode in American Jewish history. Our lives are enmeshed. But you needed me, and I needed you. Just as we needed each other after 9/11, when we packed this place on the day of the attack and then on Rosh Hashanah the following week with survivors, witnesses still coughing from the ash. We did a Yiddish concert the week after Newtown when Hesh Romanowitz reminded me that Jews never stop singing. We gathered the whole community the evening after Rabin's murder. So I knew that we couldn't have that week be devoid of a rabbi. I knew that my mother would be proud of me for not escaping during that week, as she was so proud of everything I did. There are times over the years when I've been away, when I've missed a funeral, where it's absolutely crushed me. I was on a cruise in Alaska when Marcia Khan died. I was in Australia when Deb Goldberg lost her long, courageous battle. And so in the wake of Pittsburgh, how could I abandon everyone when we all felt so vulnerable, so afraid? But was it right for me to turn my Shiva into ours? It never occurred to me, or to anyone here, to handle it in any other way. I have zero regrets, but I suspect this. On next July 1, when our clock has hit 0, I will wake up at our new home in Madison, Connecticut, take a deep breath, walk down to the beach, sit in the sand, look around at the water lapping the shore, feel the breeze on my face, and like a huge tsunami wave, it will finally hit me that my mother has died. Back in 2008, journalist Stephen Fried wrote a much-discussed book about a rabbinic search at a large synagogue in Philadelphia. It's called The New Rabbi. Highly recommended. There's a telling scene in the book that has the author eavesdropping on an older couple conversing about their rabbis behind him at a Shabbos service. So one says, "I don't like Rabbi X. He's too, well, something. I like Rabbi Y. He's nice, friendly." The other one, "I don't like him either. He's too friendly. I don't want a rabbi who's friendly." This brief snippet points out the complexities of this quest. Rabbis are expected to be 29 years old with 30 years of experience, serious yet funny, principled yet conciliatory, sophisticated yet homespun, friendly yet firm, all of that 24/7. You know, Mattel could come out with a doll called Stereotypical Rabbi. Hebrew speaking, says just Ken. Takes a second for that. It's not without reason that Fried's research led him to the conclusion that the rabbinate and not the American presidency is the toughest job in the world. I mean, it's hard. It's hard. Lots of jobs require that you grit your teeth and deal with people that you don't like. That's the world. Politicians have to do it all the time, am I right? Yeah. Don't, you have to answer. But tell me of another job where an elementary school student gets on a school bus and starts lobbying his classmates that it's time to, quote, get rid of the rabbi. 2 classmates go home crying, and their parents call me in total shock. And just a short time later, I'm standing at the bedside of that same student at Yale, New Haven, cheering him up and praying with him for his recovery. And no, there is no cause and effect between the 2 incidents. At the seminary, I failed my class in the dark arts with Professor Snape. And there's no question that I wouldn't be there. Not a shred of doubt. And that incident on the bus, as much as it pained me, and how could it not pain any human being, would never be discussed again until right now. Who would want this job? You got to swallow a lot. Toughest job in the world. Love it. You know, people come up to me after a sermon and say, it was the best sermon I ever heard. And it was so much better than the first days. You know. Okay, you're only as good as your last sermon, and this is my last sermon, so here we go. To paraphrase the old country song, Mama, don't let your babies grow up to be rabbis. I would never recommend it to anyone, but I wouldn't trade these 40 years in the biz for anything. It has made me a much better person than I ever would have been, and I've had to do things I never would have done, like setting aside superficial differences to focus on what's really important. I can't tell you how much it meant to me just literally days ago when a congregant with whom I've had major political differences over the years turned and said to me, but we always knew you would be there for us. There have been times when I wondered where maybe my best life would have been lived being a little less of a mensch. But there are times, well, like last week, when I made good on a promise I'd made to John Graubard before his death to share one of his jokes in a high holidays sermon. And I know it meant so much to his family, they told me, they wrote to me. How many professions give you the chance to make someone on his deathbed smile? That's one of the gifts of being a rabbi. Even the simplest gesture can mean so much to people. It's both a gift and an unbelievably weighty responsibility. I recall speaking to Rabbi Joe Ehrenkrantz of Congregation Agudas Shalom here when he was about to retire. And I congratulated him, and he looked at me and he said simply, I failed. I was taken aback. Here's a guy who led groups to see the Pope, who sat on the White House lawn when the Oslo Accords were signed, who served his congregation for over 40 years. I've never done any of those things. If there were ever a rabbinic dictionary that you had to look up success, you would see his face. But now I understood what he was getting at. Rabbi David Wolpe wrote in Fried's book, which was about Wolpe's father's retirement, vulnerable people in the rabbinate have a tough time. The more human you are, the more exposed, the less chance you have of making it as a rabbi. Wolpe's comment implies that try as you might, you can't be genuine, true to yourself, honest, open, and transparent, vulnerable, and succeed. And forget about being. You got to be able to put on a show, never let them know who you really are, never let them see you sweat. And that's not me. Never has been. I've never gotten caught up in the game of needing to live up to others' expectations, but it's my own expectations that are the crux of the matter. I wake up literally every morning wondering whom I've already let down that day. Knowing that somewhere, with someone I could be doing better. That bar mitzvah that I did on the day after my mother died, that family has never stopped thanking me. They did just a few weeks ago again. But who did I neglect that same day? Who was waiting for my call as I prepared to bury my mother? Maybe someone else was losing their mother. People are so grateful, don't get me wrong, and I appreciate it. The priceless gifts of being able to help people, that's my avodah. I wouldn't do it any other way. Leaving the house at 3:30 in the morning recently to do a funeral 1,000 miles away. And then turning back, coming home the same day. How could I not do that? The wedding on St. Martin that I had to turn around and come home the next day because of a tragedy in my family. But I had to go. The funerals during COVID where it was just me and the gravedigger, and I was the family's only link. Of course I had to be there, even if it was taking on risks that most weren't allowed to take. The couple grieving for a stillborn child who was still there in the room with them, not knowing what to do and how to pick up their lives, the shattered pieces of their lives. The many people with whom I've said a final Shema while watching their life breath ebb away. The teen whose parents were murdered, and there was nothing I could do but just pray before I came in the door and sit on the floor with her and be silent. The gay young adult looking for reassurance that God still loves them. The 20-something heroically climbing out of addiction, telling her story to high school students in Newtown, of all places, not long after the killings, taking countless TBE students out to lunch in Jerusalem, in Tel Aviv, in Michmoret, and another to Shabbat dinner in Budapest, who just happened to be in the neighborhood. She was in Vienna or Slovakia, I don't even remember, but she grabbed a train just to come to see us in Budapest. They're all our kids. They were all on their own. They all could have used a hug from home. All these families were so grateful, so incredibly grateful that I was there, and they still are. What a gift, and what a burden. But none of them has any idea about the hundreds of other families. And I have no idea about the God knows maybe thousands of others who hoped for me to be there for them at a given time, who heard what I did for that person, but I didn't do it for their person. And they sent thought waves my way, and I didn't hear them because I skipped Rabbi Snape's occlumency 101 mind reading class in rabbinical school too. By the way, just kidding, Severus Snapes did not teach at the Jewish Theological Seminary. For any conspiracy theorists out there, he is fictitious. I now understand what Rabbi Ehrenkrantz meant. You've got to set the bar high to be a successful rabbi. All along knowing that not only will you never come close to reaching your goal, but unless you've developed a super thick skin and a heart of stone, and not an ounce of conscience, this is a job that is custom designed to shorten your life. It is designed to break your heart. You will never find the keys. For a rabbi, love is always having to say you're sorry. And even that's not enough. And it's no one's fault. It's just how it is. I used to explain it being like a juggler with 1,000 balls in the air. But the juggler has it easy because they're just balls. It's more like what God deals with. I'm not saying I'm like God, but there is a scene in the Jim Carrey movie, Bruce Almighty, where Carrey takes God's job for a day and is buried under a blizzard of prayers written on Post-its. And I can imagine God today on Yom Kippur feeling overwhelmed by an avalanche of prayers. And then when someone actually reads what's on those Post-its, their heart breaks again and again and again. A juggler isn't reading those balls in the air. But when hundreds of you come up for Ne'ilah at the end of Yom Kippur, I know what most of you have been through. Your joys and your sorrows, and there are many joys. And I can hear the whispers of what you might well be praying for. And it's a cacophony. It is deafening. The sheer weight of all those prayers is overwhelming, a burden that after 37 years not even Atlas could lift. I know too much. And you know what gave me a sliver of grace this year? When I came to realize that none of you can possibly understand what I've been babbling about. And that's okay. I can't expect you to understand what this life is like. I can't expect most other clergy to, most rabbis can't even understand it because they're still caught up in the hamster wheel that I am now exiting. God bless them all. I feel for them. My wife, my kids, and my dogs. Only they understand it. And I'm okay with that. It took me a long time, but I'm finally okay with that. And I hope you can forgive me for my not always being there, and I will continue to work on forgiveness from my end as well. A wee bit of unsolicited advice, though, for the benefit of the next rabbi. When someone around the table suggests doing a customer service on pastoral care, look back at this sermon and just say no. Your next rabbi will thank you. So if you'll indulge me, one more story for the road. I hear Jackson Browne in my head right now as the roadies start breaking down the amps. So stay a little bit longer. Let me end at the beginning. My first Shabbat here, my tryout. Every saga has an origin story, and so in this Marvel universe, how did I get here? It all started in a 5,000-watt radio station in Fresno, California. Oh, wait, no, that's Ted Baxter. It all started with a big bang. No. It started with a mouse. That's Disney. No, not a mouse, but a mall. You see, in the mid-'80s, we liked going to the Stamford Town Center. We always drove through, and we were going from our former home in Peekskill, New York, to visit Mara's brother, who was a graduate student in New Haven at Yale at the time. So it started with a mall. If you're glad I came here, you can thank Brooks Brothers or Mara's brother. And when Temple Bethel showed up on the rabbinic placement list at a time when we were looking back to move to New England, which this is, barely, we were heading up Long Ridge Road, and one Sunday we saw the sign for the synagogue at the corner of Roxbury Road. And we drove up Roxbury Road, and I swear the building looked like Mount Sinai as we were approaching it. You turn that corner, it goes uphill by Doral, and I heard a voice, and it said, "Make a U-turn where possible." No, Siri actually wasn't around yet. I didn't feel called or anything, but something felt right. We took a spin around the lot and liked what we saw. We made that U-turn and went back down Roxbury Road past the schools my as yet unimagined kids would one day attend. I sent in my resume, was interviewed by a few machers at the Bowers House on Heatherwood. Rabbi Goldman was there, and as I recall, so were Alan Coulter, Jerry Pock, Ron Gross, and Arthur White. The Mans and Rodwins weren't, but they came to scout me out at my synagogue in Peekskill a week later, throwing my congregation into abject panic because if you knew Norma and Milt, Judy and Roger, they had trouble slinking into the background. At the Oneg, Norma started serving coffee and talking about how much they liked me. A few weeks later, I was invited for Shabbat service. It was February 20th, 1987, 1 week after I turned 30. And having no bar mitzvah scheduled at my current place, I came. Despite frigid weather and a holiday weekend and almost no publicity, about 100 people showed up for the service. I was awestruck. What a place! A sanctuary to die for. And I was very, very impressed with the oneg. Great cake. No paper plates. The real china came out. The people were friendly and seemed happy to see me. In fact, some started kissing me on the cheek, which for me was a little weird. Sandy Segartle came over to me and said, "We're a kissing congregation." It sounded pretty good to me. It was so wonderful coming to Stamford, living among such prestigious neighbors as Superman, Young Frankenstein, and Rosanna Dana. Over the years, I could proudly tell my colleagues that I hailed from the home of Purdue Pharma professional wrestling and Jerry Springer of blessed memory. So on that cold night of my tryout, the portion was Yitro. Just a few days after Tu B'Shvat, I tied together the great themes of the holiday and the portion and talked about the Torah as a tree of life. At Mount Sinai, I said, God looked upon a nation of slaves and saw in them a kingdom of priests. God looked upon these nothings, these refugees, 500,000 refugees from Egypt, underachievers, perpetual complainers who hadn't even wanted freedom. Asaf Suf, the Torah calls them, riffraff, and yet God called them a holy nation. Am Kadosh, a nation apart, a treasured people, Am Segula. Before even giving them the Torah at Sinai, before planting that seed of greatness, before a single commandment had been uttered, God saw within them the potential for greatness. I then said, it is the mark of a great artist, a visionary, to be able to look at a seedling and see a tree, to be able to look at what beyond what is actually there and see what could be there, what will be there, what must be there. Who among us could have seen greatness within the hearts of these Israelite slaves? Who among us can look out the windows of our houses in the middle of the winter and actually see spring? Can we imagine the blades of grass beneath the snow? Can we hear the birds over the din of the plows? Can we visualize an explosion of green upon the bare branches of the trees? It's not easy, but it's exactly what we have to do, I said. We must plant those seeds, even though it is still cold and icy. We must see the forest, even though there is no forest yet to be seen. We must be future-oriented, even though so many forces conspire to tie us down to the past. That's what I said to you the very first time you heard me speak. When I looked out at you, I did not see riffraff from Egypt. You were dressed quite well, actually. I realized I needed to get back to Brooks Brothers and fast. But I did see seedlings. Part of me saw not who you were, but what you could become, and what we could become together. What could become of the work of our hands? In my mind, I imagined daffodils ready to burst forth from the cold, hard earth. There are 7, some say 6 questions that the Talmud tells us we will be asked when we reach the heavenly gates. Did you conduct your business affairs honestly? Did you set aside special time in your schedule for Torah study? Did you do all you could to bring forth a new generation? Did you yearn for world redemption? Did you deal deeply in matters of wisdom? And did you learn critically? It's fascinating that none of these questions has to do with ritual observance, nothing about Shabbat or Kashrut, but ethics. Were you honest? Did you apply your learning into world repair? Did you foster hope for the future? Did you try to make a difference? These are the questions the Talmud asks. I want to add 2 more. Rabbi Arnold Goodman, a real mensch and former Rabbinical Assembly president, passed away this year, recounted a story of sitting and having lunch at a rabbinical conference. After the lunch, he looked visibly shaken as he told a student what had just happened. He said, we were going around the table, and each of us was sharing the greatest accomplishment of our rabbinate. One of our friends was quiet. We asked, so Nu, what's your greatest accomplishment? He answered, I raised nice kids. That's the first question a rabbi has to answer. Whether referring to biological children or all the other ones, including the kids whose b'nai mitzvah I refused to miss. Did I raise nice kids? I think I did. Couldn't be prouder of mine. Pretty darn proud of yours. They're all my kids, by the way. That has no expiration date. Every Jewish child deserves to have their own childhood rabbi who will love them unconditionally and always be there for them. And that relationship lasts for life. And one more question. Did I board that plane with Pamela? Did I keep my promise? The promise that I made to her when she was so afraid, as she stared deeply into my eyes. That is, in the end, what matters. Having integrity. Being worthy of trust. That is the whole ball game. It's horrible to say this, but in our world right now of rampant abuse by people of the cloth, it's no small accomplishment to know that you have been able to trust me with your kids all these years. And I've been responsible with your kids. And my mitzvah fund has been audited every year. What else can a congregant ask for? And it's no small thing that couples could entrust me to help them through hard times, to the point where even when they got divorced, this remained a safe space for both of them. To be worthy of trust is a huge deal. I am immensely proud of that. Integrity is all the capital I have. It is everything. And so I boarded that plane to Israel and not that flight to Atlanta. And because I did, the entire universe was upended. All the things that would have happened had I moved away 20 years ago did not happen. All the good things that we've experienced here for the past 20 years, they did. All that, and because I didn't go to Atlanta, I got to be on the right side of 28-3. It's another one of those, think about it. Because Pamela asked me for that promise, and because I said yes, your life was changed. We all live such elaborate, interwoven lives. Teach us, O Lord, to balance our days, our work and our life, that we may obtain a heart of wisdom, that our work and our life become one with who we are, that we really are, and that we pour every ounce of our God-given breath into everything we do, with all our heart and all our soul and all our might. And now, 37 years after I spoke to this congregation for the first time and saw seedlings, I now look out and see 37 fully grown gardens. One stacked on top of the other, and each pew is stacked 37 times, like planes over LaGuardia, circling. I see them all, the dead, the living, the not yet dreamed of. Feels like that last scene from Les Miserables, which opened on Broadway 1 month after my opening night here. And as I see you marking this moment, I'm taking a mental snapshot now. And it will carry me for the rest of my days. And I'll take it with me wherever I find myself. Next Yom Kippur, and the one after that, and God willing, beyond. And as I look out, I see a reflection of what I could only imagine 37 years ago, shimmering through our windows and sparkling in your eyes. And as I look very closely, squinting in the dimming light, running my fingernails into the dirt, I think I may have spotted what I've been searching for all along: the keys. For the privilege of serving you, thank you. returning to our service. We have a long way to go in our service, and I really encourage people to stay. Not a great golf day out there. Please stay a little bit longer. Cantor is going to sing along with our harp, with Lisa, El de Alto.